Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Jeff Wysocki. Jeff's the Chief Information Officer of the Mosaic company, a company he's been with for about a year and a half now. Mosaic is one of the world's leading producers and marketers of concentrated phosphate and potash crop nutrients, something we'll get into the greater detail of what that means in just a moment. It's a Fortune 350 company with nearly $9 billion in revenue, 13,000 employees, and serves customers in over 40 countries. Jeff is also formerly a business unit chief information officer at Medtronic, a company that he was with for a bit more than 9 years as well. Well, Jeff, welcome. Great to see you today.
Thanks, Peter. Nice to see you as well.
Well, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, as Mosaic is probably as a B2B organization, is not necessarily a household name to everyone who will be listening to this. I mentioned some of the basics, that it's a producer and marketer of concentrated phosphate and potash crop nutrients. I hope you won't take offense. That's additional description of that would probably be appropriate to help our listeners and viewers learn a little bit more as to what that means. Would you take a moment and do so?
Sure. Sounds great, Peter. I wasn't particularly aware of Mosaic before I joined as well, so good to get everybody grounded there. So we primarily are a mining company that mines phosphate and potash globally, and we really use that to provide both feed and fertilizers for the agriculture industry. And we have a big footprint in Brazil and North America. That's where the majority of our revenue sits, although we do have a presence in India and China as well, in addition to distributing in quite a few other countries.
Excellent. And I'd love to talk a little bit about IT's role in an organization like that. In past conversations, you and I've talked a bit about the IT strategy and the 5 prongs to it. I'll roll through those really quickly, and I'd love to maybe have you dive into what each of those entails. Your current strategy includes partner to win, accelerate impact of IT, unlock data, security and scale, and business of IT. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we kind of cover each of those in order and get a little bit of a description as to what each means. Let's begin with partner to win. What does that entail?
Sure. So when I joined Mosaic, one of the things that we undertook immediately was to take a look at what's the IT strategy going forward. How do we take a look at our team members? How do we take a look at what the perception of IT was? And upon joining, it was very clear that the brand of IT wasn't where it needed to be within the organization. And one of the things that I heard loud and clear was that the relationship between a lot of the stakeholders across Mosaic and the IT organization was broken. So one of the terms that I've really liked and something I fundamentally believe in is the word partnership. It's a scenario where technology underlies just about every company strategy element, going forward. And IT needs to be at the table having the conversation as to how technology can enable a lot of those business capabilities. So for me, it was reimagining not only the culture of IT and how do we think about playing a role there, but also organizationally, how do we structure ourselves so we're at the table having those important conversations as the business is thinking through some of their strategies. So really excited to see both some structure changes we made to the organization in order to set up sort of a business partner view, as well as, I've been really, really pleased with the conversations changing from IT being, I want to please the customer, I want to be, responsive to what they need, to a partner at the table having the right conversation around value, around benefit, around risk, and how IT can play a broader role there. So really excited about progress we've made. Still some ways to go, but the right conversation.
Jeff, that's interesting. If we could dive into that just a little bit further, that would suggest, I would imagine, a bit of a culture change. The way you've described that is kind of a new way of operating, not necessarily the historical way of operating as an IT function. Talk a bit about the way in which you think about making that change happen. Does it entail bringing in some new people who kind of know what good looks like in this new reality? Does it include retraining or reorienting in some way the existing staff so that they have the skills, new skills necessary to bring that objective to life?
Yeah, to me, it's really around a couple of different pieces. One is obviously the team. We have a lot of tenure at Mosaic, which is fantastic. We have a lot of people who really know the business well. So that was a huge positive coming in. I think with that, though, comes what's the art of the possible, and what does good look like that they've seen in some other industries. So we brought in some people who have a little bit of that perspective as well. But for me, it's really changing the way we operate was the main piece and part of what we've looked at. I mentioned earlier about sort of the business partnership piece, but we've also spent a lot of time on just what we consider to be our operating model. And that's a big shift we've made around our investment in Agile. We're about 6 months down that journey at this point. Really excited, even just over the last month, to see the progress and how that's moving forward. So to be able to move from kind of that traditional, give me the information, I'll come back to you a year from now and deliver something, to driving to quicker value. And it's really gotten at a more of a partnership conversation where the business sees exactly what we're working on. We're very transparent about what we're doing. We're in a situation where we're kind of locking in funding from quarter to quarter as well, and have looked at sort of a block funding approach, where that's a little different than maybe what everyone's been accustomed to around sort of that annual funding process. That gives us a lot more flexibility and be able to reprioritize as needed. And I know with the environment with everyone in right now with COVID and everything else, having that flexibility is really important. But I think the other piece is it really is a modern way of working. So for all the IT employees, I think it's a more exciting time now to be working in an operating model that's exciting, that's current, and that really starts driving more value through the rest of the organization quicker.
It dovetails nicely with the second objective, accelerate impact of IT. Talk a bit about some of the methods that you're using to do so. I can imagine some of what you just described in terms of agile methodology and better collaboration with the rest of the organization is part of the pathway there. But talk about some of the other aspects that bring that to life, please.
Yeah, I think one of the things that were really important as I came in is I want to make sure IT's objectives and capabilities are very aligned to where the corporate companies key objectives are. And as we rolled out our 2021 objectives, so we've got really 6 key priorities across Mosaic that our CEO has outlined. Very clearly, IT capabilities are required to support every single one of those 6 priorities. And that it's a very clear line for both my team and for the rest of the organization to understand that those priorities need some technology component to it. And then for my team to be able to see that, hey, we're directly impacting the benefits of the company. So really important to kind of tie those two things together. But we've had great examples of some amazing projects. We went live earlier this year with a project where we're calling it our operating center, where we took information and processes that used to sit directly at one of our mine sites and centralized those into an integrated operations center 40 miles away. So we've got individuals sitting in this operating center, essentially running machinery at a mine 40 miles away in real time. We've got analytics that are coming in and showing them how they're operating, how they're performing, as well as how they think about their planning going forward. So just one really great, amazing example where we partnered very closely with our operations teams. IT obviously had a huge component of that around our infrastructure and around some of our data to be able to accelerate our impact. We're taking that model now and rolling that out in other spots across the company. That's just one really exciting example of IT playing a much different role than we have historically across the company.
Very interesting. And not so surprisingly, unlock data is one of the areas you're looking to focus on as well. This is certainly a topic that is rising in importance all across a lot of companies generally, IT organizations more specifically, as there's so much that can be done and so much value in harnessing data to in better ways. Talk a bit about the way in which you're thinking about that.
This is probably the number one topic that came up as I was going through the process of joining Mosaic. Universally, every conversation I had was about, hey, we've got more of an opportunity with data. So we stood up a new program. We call it the MIC, the Mosaic Information Center. And it's really sort of our foundation around what are we doing with data. And that's everything from how do we look at capturing information from our devices at the manufacturing and mining sites, all the way through to what do I do with my financial information, my sales, supply chain information. Putting that information into kind of a current architecture and really freeing that up then for a lot of self-service analytics across the organization. It also gives us a platform then to be able to take and start to look at AI and some of those sort of machine learning capabilities as we go forward as well. So we're very early on in our journey around that. I'd say there's some growing pains as the organization's going through this, but really exciting. And I had a conversation with my CFO yesterday on this exact topic. How do we get smarter about looking at opportunities to use the information we have? Really, whether it's again financial information, supply chain, a lot of really great opportunities within our operations areas. It's an area we're just early on, but you can start to see the pieces and puzzles coming together here around our MIC program.
Very interesting. Every IT organization needs to focus on security. So as you're innovating, making sure that you're also bearing in mind, associated risks and evaluating those accordingly. But you also talk about security and scale. Talk a bit about how those two fit together in an objective.
Yeah, let me start with the scale conversation. So when I joined Mosaic, one of the things that was, I think exciting to me is they pushed a lot of the decision making in the organization down into our business units, right? So I've got individuals almost at the mind level with the opportunity to really make decisions and move fast. So it's really exciting when you kind of push some of that decision making down, but at the same point, you're missing the opportunity for scale across the company. So a lot of things we saw that were going on maybe in one mine site weren't necessarily being leveraged at another. So we're trying to look at how do you start putting platforms and capabilities in place really globally that start aligning and providing scale across the company. So whether it ends up being sort of our SAP environment and capabilities around that to learnings at our operating level, there's a huge opportunity there for us to continue to push scale. On the security side, I think one of the things that I was excited about was we had an opportunity to stand up. We call it our IT OT architecture group. And this is really getting together some of the thought leaders in the operations area who are really leveraging and pushing the use of technology, along with my IT architecture and security teams. And as new ideas are coming up, really before they become an actual project, that team is reviewing those and getting together and thinking about things around architecture, around scale, and around security. And we've put roughly 40 projects through that and have really been able to look for global opportunities as well as making sure that on the security side, we're doing the right thing and securing Mosaic appropriately. So getting really out front of a lot of the conversations that are happening where in the past, security was maybe a bit of an afterthought after somebody made a decision, pushing that much more forward in the process, I think has provided a lot of benefit.
That's interesting. And the last one is business of IT. What does that entail, Jeff?
This is really how does IT work and some of the basic kind of blocking and tackling around IT. Yeah, we're in a scenario here where I think we did an okay job around some of our kind of core processes, but really to, again, get the kind of current thinking around that. We've looked at capabilities around TBM, around our finances within IT. We've looked at new vendor management processes and how do we centralize those and negotiate better, as well as we implemented tools like Jira around being able to take and look at our portfolio of IT initiatives. So this is really kind of the house of IT. How do we take care of our own house and do the things that we need to be doing to be a more effective partner across the company?
And it's interesting. I'm hearing you say from across this these five objectives, really modernizing the way in which IT performs all that it does. Ensuring that you are building for the future, that you are simplifying where possible, that while still adding value, and frankly also trying to add additional value, find new ways of adding value for the organization as well. Is that a fair synopsis across this?
It's a great way to put it. I think the simplicity piece is kind of lost sometimes. You want to put capabilities and processes in place that people think occasionally can be, hey, this is burdensome or this takes longer, but it actually streamlines and makes things easier, as well as drives value for the organization. A good example would be around some of our vendor management processes. We've really worked and partnered very closely with our legal team on tightening that up. Well, it's improved our financial posture around those contracts. It's given us the opportunity to improve our negotiation power and save money, as well as it's allowed us to get a framework together that when new contracts come in or new things come forward, we can actually move faster. So it might have been a little bit of slowing down to go faster in some of these examples. But I think the other piece that you highlighted is really important is moving the shift to be more modern, right? That's a really important word for me. As an IT professional, I want to be out front. I want to have a modern environment. I want to be in a modern workplace. And that's really important and is absolutely fundamental to what we're doing.
And I think I'm also hearing across the answers you gave a new way of evaluating the value, or maybe better put, a broader way of evaluating the value that IT can contribute. IT departments long were focused on the bottom line of the profit equation, that is cost savings, for instance. But I'm hearing, if I believe I'm hearing correctly, you'll validate that you're also focusing on the top line, that is revenue growth and new ideas that will augment revenues, as well as thinking about different kinds of customer employee experiences through better use of digital means. Is that a fair way of thinking about things? And does that align with the way in which you're orienting the IT organization?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I really look at it in three lenses, right? There's a revenue part of the conversation around value, there's a cost component of value, and there's a risk component of value. I think IT plays a role in all three of those. We've got an example, we've got some work underway right now on a really great customer facing digital initiative where a very small, 1% improvement and some work we're doing drives a couple $1 million to the bottom line, right? Having sort of that capability and that understanding that, hey, a small capability that we're going to put in place in the digital front can drive top line revenue is a conversation we're not having before, right? So to try to drive not only just the IT team, but also our business partners to be thinking that same way, I think is really exciting. There's definitely cost opportunity, right? For me, I think it's IT's job with technology. You got to be doing more with less, right? I think you got to be continuing to look to pull costs out of the organization with an eye toward reinvesting that in those differentiator areas. Like we talked about, whether it's digital, whether it ends up being data and analytics, whether it ends up being our operations technology areas. I want to be able to drive those costs out of the core and into those differentiated spaces. And then for me, the last one is risk, whether that ends up being security, whether that ends up being data risk. IT plays a pretty significant role in making sure that we're pulling risk out of the organization as well.
You've had, Jeff, an unusual pathway to the CIO role. In the introduction, I focused on your two most recent set of responsibilities, now as a global CIO, previously as a BU CIO at Medtronic, as I mentioned. But you've worked actually across a vast array of industries, from health insurance, consumer goods, the beverage industry, again, medical devices and healthcare. You were a part of a startup for a time. You're now in mining and agriculture, as you pointed out. You've also had roles outside of IT, including sales, marketing, digital operations. And I wonder, there are some people who work within a single function in a single industry, perhaps even a single company, as they rise up to a role equivalent to yours in other organizations. I wonder how the diversity of experiences in different industries, but also different functional areas, have colored the way in which you think about your current role.
It comes up almost every day, Peter, in every conversation on kind of that experience. I've been fortunate enough. I've worked in 5 Fortune 500 companies, and be able to look across the industries. It's interesting because you do find, I'd say, the majority of people have a way to stay within their lane from a vertical perspective throughout most of their career. And I found by looking across these different areas, one, there's absolute applicability across the different industries that I think most people don't realize. I'd say the second thing for me is you've got pockets of capabilities in those different areas that are higher in some industries and lower in others. So as you went from, like, I'd say your consumer goods was very, very analytically driven, right? Well, I was able to take some of that learning from consumer goods and bring that into the medical device conversations I was having that maybe weren't quite as mature. On the medical device side, they're doing some really great things in the B2B industry and market, and the way they're thinking about closed loop marketing, and some really great things that I'm applying now in the mining space. So it's been fantastic to have sort of that breadth of knowledge. The startup space for me is always an interesting one. I didn't time that one very well with the demise in the 2000s, but learned a lot and hopefully took from that some things I could do better and differently going forward.
Very interesting.
As far as your comment on the different spaces, I was fortunate enough to run our sales, marketing, and digital operations for a number of years while I was at Medtronic. And one of the areas that I felt like was the most exciting for me was sort of that pulse of the sales business, day to day, week to week, month to month, and quarter to quarter. I would always look at that being a fundamental shift in my mindset as to how to understand how the company runs, how the finances of the company runs, how our sales leaders need to function and what they need to drive to. And sort of that rhythm of the business that you learn by being in different functions, and especially even outside of the IT area, it's just something you don't have an appreciation for that I didn't have before when I sat within the IT teams. So that sort of business knowledge and capability then comes into conversations I have every day. I had a conversation yesterday with one of our sales leaders, and I am very well versed in being able to talk to sales vernacular, marketing vernacular, probably more than the normal sort of IT individual would. So it's helped me continue to progress in my career.
That's great. I appreciate you reflecting on that. It is a fascinating set of experiences that have led to the post you currently have. I wanted to conclude by asking you about trends. You've mentioned a few of them. The better use of data is certainly what one. You mentioned actually in light of that very objective of yours, the increased use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Curious whether you'd like to go deeper into those very topics or others that come to mind in terms of trends that you think are going to be most important for Mosaic, and more generally speaking, as you look to the future?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, for me, this is probably the most exciting time in my career. You're seeing a trend now where technology is fundamentally at the heart of every sort of strategy every business is moving forward with. Obviously, I think the COVID situation has accelerated some of that. So for me, it's everything from what are we doing with data and machine learning, AI sort of capabilities, which I think we're just barely scratching the surface on, to augmented virtual reality sort of capabilities. I mean, I love the scenario where I could have an individual looking at a piece of machinery at a mine in Brazil, also looking at a mine in Florida here, and sharing some of that insight back and forth. The 5G capabilities that we're going to start to see, very critical for us. A lot of our sites are in spots that aren't necessarily, I'd say, the most accessible, and having some of that technology available where my engineer has got the information he needs at his hand to be able to make more important decisions. Really critical capabilities. But I think that the biggest piece for me is it's IT being able to tell the story of how this information applies back to our business capabilities. It's interesting for technology's sake, but for me, how do I ground that in driving meaningful value, whether that's financial value, whether that's strategic value for the organization. And there's no better time for IT to have been in the space we're in right now to be able to tell that story.
That's great. Thank you for that overview. Well, Jeff Wysocki, thank you so much for joining me on Technovation today. It's been fascinating to learn about your career path, the specifics of what you and your team are doing at Mosaic as part of your strategy, and the various aspects of even anticipated new levels of value that you are driving for the organization as well. It's been a great conversation.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, Peter. Exciting times ahead.